The Black Death was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. Arriving in Europe in 1347, it killed an estimated 30 to 50% of the continent's population in just 4 years. This catastrophic mortality was not merely a historical tragedy, it was a watershed moment that shattered the foundations of the medieval world and accelerated the transition to the modern era. Part 1, The Arrival and the Horror, 1347 to 1351. Origins and Spread. The plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, originated in the steppes of Central Asia. It traveled along the Silk Road, reaching the Crimean port of Kaffa, modern Feodosia, Ukraine, in 1347. From there, it was carried by flea-infested rats aboard Genoese merchant ships fleeing a Mongol siege. The ships docked at Messina in Sicily, and from that moment, the plague spread with terrifying speed. It moved relentlessly through trade routes, by sea to major ports like Marseille, Venice, and Barcelona, and by land along rivers and roads into the heart of Europe. By 1348, it ravaged Italy, France, and England. By 1350, it had reached Scandinavia and the remote villages of Greenland. Symptoms and mortality. The plague manifested in 3 forms. Bubonic plague, the most common form, characterized by painful, swollen lymph nodes, buboes, in the groin, armpits, and neck. Victims suffered high fever, chills, and delirium, with a mortality rate of 60 to 90%. Septicemic plague, where the infection entered the bloodstream, causing tissue to turn black and die, likely origin of the name Black Death. It was almost always fatal. Pneumonic plague, an infection of the lungs that could be spread person to person through airborne droplets. It was 100% fatal, often within 24 hours. Society collapsed under the strain. Cities were overwhelmed. Mass graves, like the one at East Smithfield in London excavated centuries later, became commonplace. The well-known nursery rhyme Ring a Ring o' Roses is a folk memory of the symptoms and inevitability of death. Part 2, The Immediate Economic Upheaval. The sheer scale of death triggered an immediate and profound economic crisis, which soon turned into an opportunity for the lower classes. 1. The collapse of the manorial system. Medieval Europe was built on manorialism, a rigid, hierarchical system where serfs were tied to the land, providing labor and goods to the nobility in exchange for protection and a place to live. Labor shortage, with up to half the workforce dead, fields lay fallow, and harvests rotted. The scarcity of labor became the single most important economic fact. End of serfdom. Serfs, now a valuable commodity, realized their newfound power. They could demand wages for their work and often fled their manors to seek better opportunities in cities or on estates offering higher pay. Landlords, desperate to have their land worked, were forced to comply. This broke the centuries-old cycle of unpaid labor and began the irreversible decline of serfdom, especially in Western Europe. 2. Wage inflation and falling rent. The laws of supply and demand took over. The price of labor, wages, skyrocketed, while the value of land plummeted. Landlords who had relied on rents found tenants could now negotiate dramatically lower rates or simply leave for better offers. The old feudal economy, based on land ownership, was suddenly far less profitable for the aristocracy. 3. Decline in trade and initial chaos. The immediate aftermath saw a sharp decline in trade and manufacturing due to the death of artisans, merchants, and consumers. However, this downturn was relatively short-lived. Part 3, The Profound Social Transformation. The plague did not just kill people, it shattered medieval worldviews and social structures. 1. Crisis of faith and the Church. The Church, the central institution of medieval life, failed to provide answers or comfort. Prayers, processions, and pilgrimages did nothing to stop the plague. This led to a widespread crisis of faith. The flagellant movement, groups of extremists, known as flagellants, traveled from town to town publicly whipping themselves to atone for humanity's sins. They challenged the Church's authority and were eventually condemned by the Pope. Scapegoating and persecution. With no scientific understanding of disease, people sought someone to blame. This led to violent pogroms against Jewish communities, who were falsely accused of poisoning wells. These persecutions were often fueled by jealousy, as Jewish moneylenders, a profession forbidden to Christians, held the debts of many Christians.
Weakened authority, the Church's failure, coupled with the death of many knowledgeable clergy, severely damaged its spiritual monopoly. This created an intellectual opening that would later contribute to the Reformation. 2. A new focus on mortality in life. The constant presence of death gave rise to new art and literature focused on mortality, memento mori, remember you must die. The dance of death, danse macabre, became a popular artistic motif, depicting skeletons leading people from all walks of life to the grave, emphasizing the universality of death and the vanity of worldly status. Paradoxically, this obsession with death also led to a greater appreciation for life. Those who survived, often inheriting wealth, developed a taste for finer goods and pleasures, fueling a new consumerism. 3. Shifting power dynamics. The traditional three-estate model, those who pray, those who fight, those who work, was irreparably broken. The laboring classes were no longer at the bottom with no leverage. A new, more fluid social structure began to emerge where wealth and skill, not just birth, could determine one's status. Part 4. The long-term economic reshaping. The immediate crisis gave way to a century of profound economic change that laid the groundwork for modern capitalism. 1. The rise of a money economy. With serfdom dying, labor was increasingly paid in cash wages rather than feudal obligations. This accelerated the transition from a land-based economy to a money-based economy. More people entered the monetary system, increasing trade and market activity. 2. Changes in land use and the rise of yeoman farmers. Landlords, unable to find enough labor for traditional cereal farming, often switched to more profitable pastoralism, raising sheep for wool. This required far fewer workers. Peasants who accumulated enough money could now buy their own land, creating a new class of independent yeoman farmers. 3. Guilds under pressure and higher standards of living. Urban craft guilds were devastated. To replenish their ranks, they were forced to relax their restrictive rules, allowing new members to enter more easily and innovate. The combination of higher wages and lower land and food prices meant the standard of living for the average laborer rose significantly for the next century. They could now afford better food, clothing, and even luxury goods. 4. Early capitalism and social mobility. The massive redistribution of wealth through inheritance allowed a new class of entrepreneurs, merchants, and skilled artisans to flourish. This capital was invested in new ventures, fostering a more dynamic, profit-driven economy. Social mobility, while still limited, became more possible than ever before. Part 5. Government reaction and repercussions. The ruling classes did not give up their privileges without a fight. They used the law to try to turn back the clock. The Labor Laws. In 1351, England King Edward III passed the Statute of Labourers. It was a classic example of elite backlash. It mandated that all able-bodied adults under age 60 must work. It froze wages at pre-plague levels. It forbade laborers from moving elsewhere for better pay. Similar laws were passed across Europe. These statutes were largely unenforceable. The economic pressure of the labor shortage was too powerful, and workers continued to secure higher wages. The attempts to enforce these laws, however, created immense social tension and was a primary cause of the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, a major uprising that further challenged feudal authority. Conclusion: the dawn of a new world. The Black Death was an unimaginable human catastrophe. Yet, from this devastation emerged the seeds of the modern world. By destroying the existing economic and social order, it created a vacuum filled by innovation, opportunity, and a new emphasis on the individual. It broke the back of feudalism, empowered the laboring classes, weakened the church's absolute authority, and accelerated the shift towards a capitalist, money-based economy. The world that emerged was more volatile, more unequal in new ways, but also more dynamic and open to change. It set the stage for the Renaissance, the age of exploration, and, ultimately, the modern era. The plague did not just reshape Europe, it forced it into a painful, transformative rebirth.